Hi there. It's October the 9th, and we're starting a new section of the Greek Scriptures today with Paul's letter, the first letter to the Thessalonians. Now, Thessalonica, or Thessaloniki as it's called today, is in northern Greece, and it was the second place that Paul went to after he'd started his journey in mainland Europe. He'd been in Philippi, but then after that he came to Thessaloniki. And he came at a time of great difficulty, as he describes in this opening reading. And by the way, we're reading from chapter 1, verse 1 and through to 2, verse 8. And it was a time where Paul had suffered greatly in Philippi. He'd established the church in the house of Lydia, but he'd also been opposed by the owner of a slave girl, out of whom he and Silas, who was accompanying him, had cast a spirit of prophecy, a spirit of divination. And for this they were imprisoned. But then Paul revealed that he was a Roman citizen and insisted on being treated properly, and they eventually made him leave Philippi, and from there he went on to Thessalonica. In Thessalonica, he began to teach, was in the synagogue there teaching, but was rejected by the Jews, so he went to the house of Jason, who was holding the meetings, and then there was trouble again. Those who were offended, the Jewish people who were offended at Paul's teaching, came to the house of Jason and dragged out and beat Jason, and they urged Paul and Silas to move away from there and to go on. So that's the background on the context that Paul is writing in this letter, to the first letter to the Thessalonians. He's probably writing it from Corinth, from the next stage of his journey, and it's probably one of his earlier letters, maybe the first letter after Galatians. But he's writing it back from Corinth, which is in Achaia in southern Greece. He's writing it back to his friends in Thessalonica to see how they're getting on. So the letter opens in a very standard way for one of Paul's letters, a standard way for Greek letters, starting with the people who are sending it. Notice here as well that he includes Silas in this opening. It's Paul and Silas and Timothy, and Silas in Greek Silwanos, and he's the one who's been traveling with Paul. So Paul writes from them and sends greetings to the church in Thessalonica. He is blessed by their faith, their good work that's begun in them. And Paul then reminds them that when he came, he didn't come just with words. The gospel hadn't arrived with them with words, but also with the power of the Holy Spirit. Paul is not just preaching a reasoned word. He's actually demonstrating the good news of Jesus by his deeds, by the deeds of the Holy Spirit. And he says, because of the faith that they have in Thessalonica, the news of them has gone out across the areas of Macedonia, in which Thessalonica is situated, but also in Achaia, down in the south, where Paul is, where Corinth is. There are many who are appreciating the good news because they've become imitators again of Paul. They've taken on Paul's example. They've begun to form their faith in the way that Paul is saying, and so he's encouraged, and he encourages them to continue in their faith. Paul also reminds them at the beginning of chapter 2 how badly treated he was in Philippi, and as I've just spoken about, Paul there was imprisoned and held in prison, and God delivered them through an earthquake, and eventually they saw great deliverance by God, and great justification, great vindication came. But he says he remembered how they were treated in Philippi when they came to them in Thessalonica, and how in Thessaloniki they were really welcomed by them. And Paul says the care, he reminds them of the care he had towards them. They were gentle towards them, like children. But then also, unusually, towards the end of our reading, he likens himself to a mother caring for her children. And it shows here that Paul has no problem with using those kind of images, the image of a mother who is caring for her children. After all, God himself speaks in Isaiah of being the one who, even if a mother could forget her children, he could not forget them. And Jesus says he wanted to be like a hen, caring for the chicks. And so this picture of Paul being like a mother caring for his children is a very powerful one that would have been understandable to anybody reading his letters. Let's be encouraged then today that when we face trials in our faith, even like they did in Philippi and in Thessalonica, we can know that God, by the power of his Holy Spirit, God is caring for us. God is looking after us in a motherly way and a fatherly way. Have a very good October the 9th.